I'm super excited to be here and really fortunate to be talking about the topic of leadership and team building. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Tuesday evening. I typically like to really have informal conversations. So given that we're all in the Zoom living room, please type out on chat where you're joining from. I really love this topic because, as this slide shows, when I first started in my career, I really wasn't sure about leadership style or how to build a team. So it was a lot of exploration. So in my early years of kind of building my style, I actually led teams of different types over 20 years. So I worked at Kraft for 13 years and led different size teams ranging from kind of small 3-4 people teams to one that was around 30 or 40 that were all different disciplines and focused on kind of building one business in North America. So I would say that for my years of testing out my style, as well as experiencing how different teams work, I was able to really refine and start uncovering people's powers and strengths, particularly on different types of teams. So now I'm in the fortunate spot where I'm able to kind of teach and share this topic that I really love. So I teach leadership at Seneca College. And as Serena mentioned, I'm also the founder of a company called Pivot Perspectives, where I offer mentoring and coaching to founders and leaders of different sizes and groups. So welcome to the session. Serena, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll at this point, I wanted to understand kind of where all of your experience for leadership and team building is. So the options are: you have a lot of experience leading a team, you have very little experience, and maybe you are just starting out and you don't have any at all. And if none of these options stoke your fancy, you are welcome to choose other. If you choose other, feel free to share your experience, and would love to hear where all of you are joining from. Awesome. So I see Toronto, London, Toronto. Welcome, everybody. Amazing. Hello. I like the hello with the extra O's. Okay, seems like we have a good split. I'm going to wait for a few more people to join. So feels like everybody's got, ranging from a little to a lot. So those of you who have a lot of experience, this session only gets better with your own experience. And so please pipe in, especially when I'm talking about specific areas, because all of you have different backgrounds. I'm really looking forward to hearing your experience. And if there's anything that I'm not, kind of raising at that point in time, feel free to raise it. If the moment allows, I'll answer it right there. But if not, I think we have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So look forward to having more conversation at that time as well. All right, I'm just gonna see where everybody is. So I think we can close the poll at this point. It actually looks like everybody is focused around very little and some. So I think you're in a good spot today. I'd love to, I'm going to share the results for everybody. So you can see that we're kind of evenly split. For those of you who don't have any experience at all, take this for kind of just information gathering right now and start to test out some informal leadership over the next week or so. All of these skills are better practiced than just listened to. So I'm a big fan of being able to use some of the skills right away. So our agenda today is really quite simple. I wanted to talk a little bit about what makes a good leader, some traits of an effective team, and then I'm going to get right into team building. So obviously the topic is leadership. For me, leadership is a big part of it is actually building a team, because otherwise you are not really, kind of you're leading in a vacuum if you don't have people that you're interacting with. So the two kind of go hand in hand. So those of you who said that you have some experience or very little experience or a lot of experience, please type out on chat, what do you think a good leader actually does? In your opinion, in your experience, what have you seen good leaders do? And be curious to hear what your opinions are, whether it's around, motivation, inspiring, great decision making, lead by example, great communication, see others become leaders. I like that one a lot. Develop, beautiful. And I see a couple of familiar names, so hi to everybody. Serve, oh, I love that. Yeah, a lot of servant leadership. Ask questions, encourage others. They produce other leaders. You guys are great at this. I love it. I love it. So yeah, a lot of the things that you guys wrote are on this page. And in fact, there's probably a whole ton of other things, but you can hear that there's so many elements that go into making a good leader. So today we're going to take a snippet of that, which is all about kind of the team building. Obviously, there's so many other topics that I'm not covering today, including communication, including support. And so hopefully I'll get the chance to come back and talk about a few more of these topics under the Ella Founding Fundamentals or any other workshops that I have the pleasure to lead. But today we're going to focus really on this aspect of team. So thank you for sharing all of those things. And I wanted to get right into kind of what a leader does in terms of the team and the topic of team building. So as we start to think about it, there's really 5 aspects that I like to hone in on. And you'll see if you ever Google team building, you're going to get a slew of different things. I actually got this from a project called Project Aristotle from Google. So Google is one of those companies that does so much research. And this was done across, I believe, 180 global teams. They looked at all kinds of different sources. So including surveys, including team interviews, including modeling. They really love their algorithms, obviously. And so they actually came up with these 5 different aspects of team. And they looked at various different factors, including, a really popular one is whether you have a best friend on the team, personalities, all these different things. And what they actually discovered were these 5 things. So it was really kind of apparent when they looked at great teams. And when they looked at great teams, they looked at both results as well as kind of how they perceive themselves in terms of effectiveness. So one was around this idea of structure and clarity. So it was really obvious what everybody did. Nobody actually questioned who was doing what. Second was this aspect of meaning. And when I say meaning, I mean that they knew that there was a higher purpose to what the team was doing, and they understood how it connected to where the organization was going. And third was this visible impact or tangible results. So it's a really interesting thing if anybody's actually looked at kind of the science of impact and growth. A really important thing for all of us in order to make impact is to actually see the tangibility, see the impact of what we're doing. So that goes with both results as well as being able to kind of put things in practice. So remember I said in the beginning that if you haven't really practiced any of these skills before, that really important thing for you to do over the next few days, ideally within the next 7 days, is to take some of these skills that we're talking about and put them in practice. So you don't have to do all of it, but take something out of what we're going to talk about today and really see the impact and see the results of it working. The fourth one is dependability. Obviously, this one's a little bit trickier. It does kind of come with time, but it goes into something called, kind of being able to count on people to do what they're saying that they're going to do and to show up when they're going to show up. And this one is intrinsically linked to this last aspect of it. When we actually have that dependability and knowing that we can count on people to do and show up, this last aspect of psychological safety was actually the most important part of effective teams. And it comes into two different realms. One is this idea of conversational turn taking. So what they found was that really effective teams didn't have one person or one group dominating the conversation. They actually had equal turns and equal time of conversational turn taking. And the second aspect of psychological safety is this element of high average social sensitivity. So, in other words, when people on the team could actually notice how each other were feeling. So, if you came into a meeting, whether virtually or live, that people were able to actually pick up cues from one another and notice and sense when somebody wasn't well, when they weren't feeling all that comfortable. And so you can hear that there's so many elements to this effective team or what a leader might do for team building. So, knowing that these are the traits that we want to achieve, I wanted to share with you 5 ways then to actually inspire and to build a strong team. So, no surprise, it's linked to how to get to this state of kind of an incredible team. And those of you who are still kind of thinking around like what a good leader does, feel free to put it in this framework that I'm going to share with you in order to achieve some of those aspects and the traits that Project Aristotle came with. So as you can see, I've kind of linked it to each one of those 5 aspects. And it's a really interesting thing, right? Because obviously when we think about team building, and I would be interested to hear your thoughts too. Obviously, we think about this idea of like building cohesiveness and maybe going off on team building events, and that's absolutely an aspect of it. I'm going to talk about that in aspect 3, but I wanted to go over these 5 pillars. One is really strengthen the culture or the structure of it. So as you heard, structure and clarity was really important in terms of having an effective team. So without that basic fundamental knowledge of what everybody does, you don't really ever actually get to cohesiveness. Second is around aligning the purpose and understanding what we're all doing. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit around what that might look like. And third is actually when you actually can build trust, because if you don't have that clarity, if you don't have that vision and direction, it's actually really hard to build trust. So we always think that we have to, start getting to know each other and go away on retreats and, get to know each other. And absolutely that's a part of it. But in my experience, when I've seen different teams, it's actually really hard to get to that state until you get to structure, until you have the structure in place. And then I would say get some visible results on the board right away so that you can reinforce all of those aspects that you're trying to build. And then actually the last piece is psychological safety. So this obviously isn't linear, but I would say that there are some pieces that you want to build in advance so that you could get to there. So thank you for continuing to type out on chat of all the different aspects that a good leader does. And you can see that all the things that you guys are talking about, strategies, implementation, good observer, it actually does go into all of these different frameworks, different pillars of the framework as well. So I wanted to kind of encourage you guys to continue thinking about some of these things that you think a leader might do and think about where in the process of team building it might come in. Okay, so I'm going to go into each one of these pillars and uncover each element. And if you do have questions, I encourage you to type it out in chat. I'll answer it if I can in that moment. If not, we'll parking lot it and answer it at the very end. So again, one of the things that I love is to be able to understand kind of where everybody is at. So strength and structure in terms of one of the key pillars. One of the elements that I wanted to talk about was this, the parts that we want to actually build structure around. So there's three parts to it. One is at the very top is your vision and goals. And this is overlapping and leading into our second one in terms of purpose. But until you understand where the direction of the company is going and where the team is going, it's really hard to build anything else. So first and foremost, we want to highlight the vision and goals for the team. Second is some of these things called rules and expectations. So I often call them norms. So if you have a new team that you've built, a big part of building this team is developing the rules and the expectations. And if you are having a new team member join you, or if you are that new team member and you don't feel like you actually know what those things are, definitely ask for it. And then the third element would be some plans and processes that you want to build structure around. So these are the three components that we're going to talk about. The first one is around vision and goals. So those of you who are have experience in team leadership, you know that the vision and goals is so incredibly important. I'm going to give you some really simple definitions. I don't want to get too far into vision, mission, and goals and the difference, but all I'll say is that the vision is the ideal state of where you envision your future. So if you've never actually articulated it for your team, that is something that I would start to jot down. So if those of you who are in a team leadership position right now, take a moment and actually just jot down what you envision the team to be in the next 6 to 12 months. If you are part of a team and you're not leading, take this time to also jot down what you think the team's vision might be. And if you're coming up blank, whether you're a team leader or you're a team member, if you're coming up blank, make a note for yourself to ask, what is our vision over the next 6 to 12 months? And if you are able to, and you feel comfortable, please share on chat what you envision that part to be, because it's really important to start out with that. And the goals are just your key steps to reach that vision. And obviously, the more specific, the more measurable it is, the better the goals are. But the vision is really that picture. And the more that you can describe that picture to somebody on your team, the better you're going to be able to reinforce all the other parts. So hopefully, those of you who are on a team, you know that vision and you're able to articulate it. If you can't, or if you feel like it's still a little bit fuzzy, that would be one of the aspects that I would definitely share with your team and develop that over the next week or so. And so the second part is that you can actually now start to develop some rules and expectations. So when you are at the beginning of a project or beginning of a relationship with your team members, let's say you're onboarding a new person, if it's not clear on what their roles are or what the expectation is, and I get this a lot, especially for startups who are looking to onboard either students or co-ops or internships. Oftentimes, this is the part that you talk about the role, but not necessarily the expectations. And what I hear a lot is, well, they didn't do what I expected them to do. And the first question I'll ask is, what have you shared in terms of examples or what you would expect at the end of the term? I'll get 50-50. I'll get a split of people who have either said, yeah, it was really clear, or they'll say, I gave them some examples, or they'll say, oh, I didn't even think. So I'll get a spectrum of examples of leaders who are sharing this part. So what I would encourage you is don't wait until things don't happen. And I would get really specific. So I gave you some examples. I call these the 4 C's, gave you 4 C's to actually talk about. And a lot of people kind of say to me, okay, it feels awkward to talk about things so specifically in the beginning. And trust me, you want to actually have some of these really specific conversations in advance. Because sometimes you actually will not know it. And these are the most common things I see. One is communication, how you like to communicate, what's your preferred style, frequency. So again, I will have heard founders actually say, "Oh, I haven't heard from this person in a couple of days." And I said, "Well, what was your agreement on your check-in?" And they'll say, "Well, we didn't." So then my question is, how do they know that you expected them to come back in less than 2 days, or what the turnaround is? So if you gave them a task to do, did you talk about when you'd expect them to actually complete that task? So don't assume things. Have this conversation in the beginning of the project or at the beginning of the task that you're assigning. And if you are the person who's on the team and you're not getting that, ask, right? These are some of the things that you actually do want to make sure that you're gaining communication on. Contribution. Again, I hear from a lot of founders in terms of, I would have liked for them to be more proactive. And my question to them is, well, what does that look like? What does proactive mean? And have you shared your expectations in terms of proactivity with them? And give me an example of the type of things that you want them to be proactive about. So again, if you are a leader and this is something that's in your brain, but that it's not written down anywhere, I would encourage you actually to develop an agreement of sorts where you lay out some of these things. And if it feels too awkward, have it in an expectations document where you kind of say, at the end, it's whatever the term is for the project, this is what I would really love to see happen. And this is an example of what that might look like. So these are so critical to establish in the beginning. And if you have a project team, those of you who are still students, again, I coach and mentor a lot of student groups. They wait until things go wrong. And then I've asked them around, like, do you have a plan to tackle contribution and constraints? And the answer I usually get back is no. So until things go wrong, that's when you kind of go, oh, I wish I had this discussion. So show of hands, if you guys know where the raise your hand function is, or the thumbs up function, how many of you have this discussion in advance of a project? And I'm hoping that many of you do, but if you haven't, jot down for yourself that this is one of the things that you need to go and do over the next 7 days. Awesome. I'm seeing a few of you raising your hand, and it's such a good practice to keep on top of. The other two that I would encourage you to talk about is if there's any constraints. Again, for whatever reason, I think we feel really awkward, myself included. I don't like to tell people that I can't do stuff. So create an opportunity in the beginning where you are voicing your constraints in advance. I encourage my students to actually talk about whether there's a time constraint. So some of the students work and they can't actually get together over a certain time period, or if there's somebody ill, or maybe you have certain, kind of health constraints that allow you to, or don't allow you to meet at certain times or do certain things. These are all things that you want to talk about. I had a person on my team who had a hearing aid, and she was really uncomfortable about doing, this was pre-pandemic. She really didn't like virtual Zoom calls because it didn't allow her to hear well enough. And it was one of those things that she said, I prefer not to do presentations over Zoom if that's possible. We had Skype back then. But it was one of the constraints that she was really honest about. And she learned over time that it was one of those things that she wanted to highlight to her clients in advance, just in case they thought that she was like kind of shirking responsibility. So, oh, great point, Warda. So think about creating a document 100%. So don't let it be one of those things that you say out loud and then expect the other person to remember. So from a constraint perspective in particular, have a document where you actually can share with your boss. I actually had somebody do that. We did that in the beginning when we were onboarding. She shared her personality style. She shared some of her constraints. And we talked about how we like to work with one another. And then consequences in terms of what happens actually things go wrong. Again, one of those things that nobody talks about until things go wrong. Um, Great practice if you do have meeting minutes. When you're onboarding somebody, I actually do try to keep a document when that person onboards. In particular, any consequences, like how do you like to be treated? Do you want to be told in public? Do you want to be told in private? Do you want to be told it before, after? Some of these things, the more specific you can get, the better. But I really do agree, recommend an agreement that's jotted down. So some great examples that people are citing here. If you do have any other ones that you found are really useful, please type it out in chat. These are just some of the areas, the top 4 that I could think of. There's so many more that I wanted to make sure that you guys weren't too overwhelmed here, but lots of things that you can highlight in terms of structure as it pertains to rules and expectations. So there may be ones that are specific to your role and your job and specifically your team. So the more specific and measurable your job is, I would jot down some of these things. The last one that I wanted to talk about was this plan and process. Again, many people have plans and processes in place. So I just wanted to make sure that if you don't have these things written out, if you don't have things documented, I encourage you to, particularly for startups that are just starting to build the team. Many of these things are kind of in your head, but not written down. I'm a big fan of keeping this written down in Google Docs, Google Drives, places where it's shareable. So one of the really important things to do is just show the task and the roles. I don't think I have it here. Do I? No. Okay. In another version, I had another column that was the responsibility. And so there's a thing called RACI. So I'll jot it down here in terms of chat. But if you've never come across this term before, RACI is for a project denotes the level of responsibility or the level of status that somebody has. So you could include this in your plan in terms of what type of role they have, the level that they may need to actually be engaged. So I see somebody raising their hand. I think that means that either you've come across this or you have a question. If you do have a question, type it out in chat. Tamara, nice to see you. And you want to then actually start to highlight who and what is going to do when, by when. So those of you who know me through food, I use the food example of potentially you're launching a product, let's say by April 12th. And so I've just worked it back. I didn't fill out everything for you, but you could start to highlight who and by when and what the task is. And then the last column I would always have is a status or action in terms of what you might want to do. Okay, so again, super simple. If you have access to a project management tool, I would do that. So in terms of team building, again, what I'd really like to do is actually highlight all of these things before we even get into kind of cohesiveness and team building. Okay, so yeah, if you've never actually seen RACI, so RACI means responsibility, accountable, contributor, and informed. So those are the 4 aspects of RACI. So yeah, sure, I can share out something with Serena that she can share with all of you later. But yeah, if you want to, you can probably do a quick Google search and have a lot of different templates in terms of RACI. So you probably just want to include a column in this particular format that I've shared with you, and it denotes what level of involvement this person actually has. So sometimes they actually don't need to be involved heavily, and that would be an inform, or they're actually the person responsible, and that would be the R. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions as it comes to plan or processes? Again, you want to develop your own process as it's specific to your team. All right. So once you have kind of the basics of that piece built in, then we want to actually make sure that everybody on the team understands what they're there for. So this idea of the responsibility, accountable, informed, and contributor comes into what role everybody plays and how they are actually linked into this purpose. So remember Project Aristotle, one of the things that was really important is for people to have meaning in what they're doing. If you never talk about this, then it's really hard for people to actually seek meaning. And we all know this, right? Like day in and day out, if we're just doing our job and if we're getting so busy, you forget why it is that you're doing what you're doing. So if you are one of those people who kind of jotted down, yep, I have a clear vision for 6 to 12 months, and you've shared it with your team, the next level that I would do is in a team building event or in their own time, you actually start to talk about how their individual goals ladder up to the teams or the organizations. And if you have a very flat organization of maybe two or three people, the team is the same as the organization. So you don't have to actually have three levels. You can just collapse it into one. But I would still have the individual piece done separately than your team and or organization. Okay. And I've given you an example here. Hi, Tamara. So I would say that you guys want to have an individual level laddered up to your organization or team. So one example might be your organizational goal would be to establish leadership in the industry with 25% share by the end of the year. So you could say that as a goal. And let's say your team was one of the really instrumental ones. So I actually use this as one of the ones from my old job. And we wanted to establish credibility within the organization as one of the top 3 experts in the industry. So I led a marketing effectiveness team, the practice, and it was about 18 people big. We were one of the key leaders in the industry, but it was a really fast growing team. There were lots of competitors coming on the scene. So I wanted to make sure that I was myself individually, I was strengthening my network within the industry with 3 speaking events. So that was the goal I set for myself. And so you can see how it actually ladders up, right? And I could see how my goals, if I achieve them, was going to help the teams and the organizations, and then vice versa. So it really has to help you as well. Like it goes both ways. So if you are onboarding a person that has individual goals not aligned, guess what? You don't have an effective team. You have a bunch of different members that all have their individual interests, but they don't ladder up to anything. And so I'll share an example of a student team that I was coaching, and we didn't really have the opportunity to do this process. So it was a virtual team. I will say that everybody came in with their individual goals, but we didn't actually have the opportunity to ladder up to the organization. And it became a really a non-cohesive team. It was not an effective team, and everybody actually just went and did their own thing. Nobody actually helped each other out. There was definitely no psychological safety. So you can see how this aligning purpose can really happen when you just lay out this super easy page for yourself. And so I'm going to share with you a sample template I have already shared this presentation with Serena, so you can feel free to just take this super easy template for everybody. This is one that I've used with my team. If you like Word document, you can convert it into a Word, but it helps you to see kind of where your goals are aligned, some of the metrics that you want to be tracking for yourself. So you saw it with the previous example. My personal goal was really easy. It was just 3 events by the end of the year. And you can actually keep track of what those events are. The last one that I would always include in there is who can actually help you. So you don't have to do this on your own. And this will actually start to create that team building as well. So I would encourage you to actually share this out if the individual is comfortable. Share it out in your team, and then you can actually brainstorm on who can help each person on the team on achieving their specific goals. So I'll stop there and get your thoughts. What do you guys think? Has anybody actually done this for their team? Have you built kind of a aligning purpose step in your team building or your onboarding? Really encourage you to do that. I had the opportunity to do that as a contributor, also as a leader, and I will say that it was super powerful. Hi, hey Tamara.
Hi. I'm sorry. Yes. I do this with my team, but not in this structured format. And I think that the latter is super effective. I've kind of just been using a document and like a list, but I've been told in the past that a list like that can be overwhelming and sometimes like seem daunting. But so I think it's fine to have a list as a specific task list. But when you organize it like this and it shows the interconnectedness, I like this a lot better. So I'm going to use this one, like this type of template going forward.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? Anybody use this kind of format or actually done this with their team? Yeah, Melanie, nice to see you.
Hi, sorry I'm not on video, but yeah, so 2 summers ago, I had a bunch of interns helping me develop, the foundation for my coaching and consulting business. And so we all sat together to state what the goal was. So we had a goal for the end of the 8 weeks that we're working together, and everybody had things that we would do to help us achieve that goal. And it was actually exactly what you stated. You're responsible for this, so you are like kind of like in the rice thing, like this is actually your task to work on. These are the individuals who can support you if you need help or if you're feeling confused or you just need backup. And then because I really wanted them to feel like, yes, it's my business, but they are individuals and they have power to make decisions, because otherwise then you're leading a team and you're micromanaging, and then what's the point of having them there, right?
And how did they react? What was their experience?
You know what? I think they were all kind of like shocked, like, so we can like make decisions like ourselves. And I was like, of course you can. Like, I don't have you here just to like watch me. I have you here because I obviously can't get all these tasks done myself. And if you have to call me every time to make a decision, I'm going to feel overwhelmed and I won't get anything done. And so I feel like it really empowered the students. They were mostly in like 3rd and 4th year, so they were already towards the end where they're getting ready for their careers. And so I think it was really meaningful.
Yeah, I love it. And those of you who are kind of starting out on a team, if you are not actually, kind of given this kind of task, what I would encourage you to do is actually develop your own individual goals. And then you can go and talk to your leader and say, to help me understand where I fit in the picture, would you mind sharing some of the team's goals? And I can, that way I can actually see where what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis ladder up to the total teams and the organizations. It really does help contribute to that trust and that cohesiveness. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Like, I think most teams that I worked with, and I actually made this mistake. So I talked about my marketing effectiveness team that I was leading. I came in and, my natural state is that I love like, bringing people in and shared leadership. And what I didn't realize was that you really need to do the roles and responsibility and the norms. There was very little structure because I hadn't created it. It was such a young team. A lot of people didn't know what to do. And so as a result, I actually didn't have this trust piece. As much as I wanted to build it without actually tackling the first two, it was almost a gong show. So I had to go back to the first two steps and build that structure, build that clarity in order for me to actually be able to do this. Now, if you're taking over a team or you're joining a team that is well oiled and that clarity is already there, then you can go straight to step 3. So if you feel like that basis, that fundamental piece is already in there, then you can get into kind of the cohesiveness. So here, this kind of goes into a bit of that dependability, right? Remember the Project Aristotle one that I was sharing with you. So here, I really do encourage everybody to share something vulnerable. And this is really tough, especially if you've never been in a group this way. I would say that, you know, if you recall my slide about myself, my early years really didn't understand what that meant. And so I kept my personal life really separate from my professional life. And I never really actually talked about stuff that was keeping me up at night. It wasn't until I joined Nielsen and I had a whole bunch of people that in the millennial stage, actually, like they really pushed me to be open, and we created this team that was super safe and really non-judgmental. And so I do think that in order for us to be able to get to that point ourselves as leaders, we need to start sharing stuff that makes us uncomfortable, and not to kind of kind of paint a rosy picture all the time. You will get judged for doing this. So I, as a leader myself within my company, I was told that I was too nice. I was told that I was getting too personal. You need to make that decision for yourself as to how far you want to go and how much of your own vulnerabilities you want to share. But I would say that based on my own experience, that safety and building non-judgment is so critical to building trust. So yeah, you know, that's all I'll share about that piece. Those of you who have other experiences, feel free to share, but I've definitely seen both sides, and I've chosen to kind of share more about myself, chosen to, kind of tell people that in truth, I don't know, right? I've been through some pretty tough examples of having to lay people off, of having to let people go, transition, be bought out, all of those things. And it's tough when you are in a state of distrust. It's really hard to build a team. So that's all I'll say about that. Some aspects that I would really encourage you guys to follow is share your values and any concerns. I honestly, and those people, Serena and Marlena, know I'm a big fan of using icebreakers like personality tests as ways to just share your own personal values, maybe some concerns, some weaknesses, some superpowers you might have. Another one that is really great, I don't get a big enough chance to do this, but really just to switch roles or job shadow. So if you do have interns who are coming in and they're just really curious about what you do, have them join you on a day of meetings so that they could see what you're doing, and they could actually, kind of switch roles. We actually did this. I lie. We did do this on when I was leading an employee resource group. We switch roles, and so we could actually see what they go through in a day. So we were able to see what the junior guys go through, and how much lack of clarity they experience. So it was really actually eye-opening. Open communication. This is a way for you to actually find common ground through any of your background, hobbies, preferences, share your goals and challenge. like I said, get below the surface and maybe actually talk about a time when you really were not comfortable or out of your depth. Don't just, talk about the superficial stuff when you are trying to build a team. It goes really far for people to understand that not everybody has great days all the time. I think we come into work sometimes thinking nobody else is struggling and everybody else is having a great time. And that's, especially over the last 2 years, nothing could be further from the truth. And like I said, with your part 1 and part 2, feel free to share this with your team. So like Melanie said, when you are actually sharing this with the team, they're often shocked because they don't believe that somebody actually cares about what they want to do. But even more than that, when I've done this with my team before, it's amazing. People actually remember what somebody else's goal is. And they'll say, oh, I remember you wanted to get more opportunity in presentation. Hey, I have an opportunity with my client to do this. Why don't you come in and do this? Or do you want to just practice? I'm more than happy to give you some feedback if that's the case. So really brainstorm on how you can help each other in terms of goals. We actually went as far as to denote champions for different topics. So we had people who were Excel champions, we had people who were tech champions. We were people who knew, an industry really well. So we kind of set up different roles. Yeah, I see a question and a hand up. I don't know if that was a comment or a question. And the last thing I'll say is if you have a chance to actually create support with each other, I'm a big fan of creating accountability buddies. So have peers be accountable to each other. So they're not really reporting to you, but they can be each other's support. Melanie, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I did. I was
Okay.
going to say exactly what you were talking about in terms of people remembering your goals and helping you accomplish them. So I'm a part of a women's group. There's like almost 100 of us or so. And one time we had a smaller group. It was an accountability group where we all talked about a set of goals that we wanted to accomplish in like 6 to 8 weeks. Can you hear me? My Zoom is being weird.
No, I can hear you 100%.
Okay. We had goals to accomplish in like a 6 to 8 week period. There were some people who were like super nervous about presentation, some people who were expert at like Zoom and lighting, some people who were like decoration experts, and other people who were dealing with like interpersonal issues, like family issues at home. And they just wanted different support systems in place. And everybody was given 2 people who helped them with their tasks, but then the rest of the group was there to support them. And I found that exactly what you said. People remember that, okay, you want to practice doing X, Y, and Z. There's an opportunity, come and do it. You really want to take less of a leadership role. You want to be supported, not always have to ask for help, but people to be able to see what's going on. They made that happen. Others who were having issues with feeling like they didn't have a good enough support system were given an opportunity, a platform to put a message in the chat in our group where it was like, okay, today was a terrible day, and people could just like check in on you and come and see how you're doing if they had that. And so it was really cool. So what you're saying is like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that it can play out on such a big group dynamic as well. So like I've seen it work with, I've done it with groups less than 10. Obviously Melanie speaking to a group that's like 100 and probably somewhere in between, anywhere between that. But the really key goal is to be clear around what it is that you want to achieve. And it's amazing. It's amazing how people remember how they can help, because we're all, again, we really love this idea of like, actually leads into my next topic super well. We love being able to see how we're making change and how we can actually help each other. So the one before psychological safety I will talk about is around this idea of visible results. So I don't know how many of you have gardening as a hobby. I do not have a green thumb, but I find that when I can see things happening, when I can see results from the, kind of putting in the effort, I am so much more motivated. I'm so much more excited to keep doing it. Working out, same thing. Oh, lovely, Julie. So yeah, like it's one of those things that, and this is no different for teams. If you are trying to build a team, I had a great boss who always talked about putting points on the board. So again, those of you who have ever interacted with me, I'm a big fan of visual. Have a place, and even if you're remote, have a place on Google, make it visual where you can keep track of something. I love the thermometer. I love dashboards. I love score sheets. And it's because once we can see things working, we can see things growing and actually moving in a direction that we wanted to go. It's exciting, right? We love seeing things grow. So being able to actually link it to an overall goal and seeing the progress that we're making on those particular goals is exciting. So we don't underestimate the role of that. And even if you're in a really short-term group, if you are a student, if you're in a short-term assignment, if you're on a co-op or an internship, don't lose sight of that. We always think, oh, we have a lot of time. The 6 to 8 weeks will go by super fast. Track it on a weekly basis. And if you want, track it on a daily basis. Just in terms of, number of conversations or something new that you learned, keep track of some of those things that will ladder up to the overall organization or team goals and your own team or your own individual goals. So some ideas that I wanted to share with you. If you do have other ideas, please share it on chat. If you don't have regular updates with the people that you're working with, I would get that at least every week. That I would say try to touch base at least every week, even if it's only for 15 minutes, just so that you can actually kind of check in on some of those metrics and some of those progresses that you want to make sure. Particularly if they're really, really new in the role, you want to ask specific questions around the impact. So I now know to avoid things like, how's it going? How are you feeling? Because guess what? Those are very subjective. And remember back to the clarity on pillar 2. If you have expectations of somebody making contribution and you haven't voiced it, when you say, how's it going? They're thinking, I'm doing great. And you're thinking they're doing horrible. So you want to make sure that you are on the same page in terms of impact. If you are part of a team and you have some knowledge from other groups, so just like Melanie did, she's had an experience from another group, share this knowledge. This is all going to contribute to impact as well as contributing some visible results. And you want to now start to reward and recognize some behavior. So with impact, you want to make sure that you're reinforcing some of these visible results, and then you can add to that. So if you do have the opportunity, recognize either through acknowledgement. I know lots of people are motivated by rewards. So if you haven't done that in the beginning, I actually did forget to talk about that in the beginning in terms of expectations. Understand their motivations as well. Understand what it is that they like to be acknowledged and how they like to be acknowledged. And any benchmarks that you have that you may be able to actually compare to your own progress. So remember my example of speaking at 3 different events. It would be very easy for me to look at some of my peer groups and see, how many they've done and what's a really good example of somebody who is active in that space. So it's always really useful. Don't get too blindsided by it, though. I would say use it as a benchmark and not as a a rigorous rule. Maybe use it as a guideline and something for the team to be able to use. A dashboard. No, I honestly, most of the dashboards I use are kind of my own benchmarks. Some good ones I've seen, Asana is pretty good from a project management tool perspective. I know in the past we've used Trello. So Trello is more project management, less around KPIs. There's one that we use in the space ourselves, and it's called Innate, INATE. So these are some tools that I've come across. I think you really have to experiment and find one that you really, really love that can actually get you to a good place. Yeah, thanks, Serena. All right, the last piece is around kind of this idea of psychological safety. And so if you remember, these were built by two different parts of it in terms of conversational turn taking and social sensitivity. Here's where we get a little bit more into the soft skill, right? Like you heard me in the beginning, it was some really functional things that you need to be able to do. So those of you who've done those assessment of like whether you're more task oriented or relationship oriented, the first part was more task and really kind of administrative. The last piece is all around emotional intelligence. So if you feel naturally really comfortable with this, then you're going to find this easy. If this is something that you have to work on, I would say it's like anything else. It's an ability that you have to practice, that you need to be aware of. There's no, kind of people who are born with it. I don't believe that. I believe that every single skill is able to be acquired and practiced and refined. So let's talk about conversational turn taking. So this is a conscious awareness that you don't want anybody to be dominating. Obviously, if you're the lead, you will be speaking more than anything else. But even when I was in a leadership position, and even now when I'm doing my lectures, I encourage everybody to pipe up. I encourage everybody to contribute, because you don't want to have like 90% dominated by one single person, especially when it's a cross-functional team, especially when you're expecting everybody to kind of come with their own knowledge. If you are noticing that there are people who are dominating the conversation, a couple of different things to consider. Make sure you have an agenda. Make sure that you actually outline different groups having different turns and taking that turn naturally. So if you're finding that somebody's always speaking up, designate a time when it's just the other people who are speaking. And you can design this fairly easily, particularly if you're noticing that people who are really quiet because they're either more introverted or they need time to think, send out the material in advance so that they can actually start to digest it and reflect on it before you need them to speak about it. So oftentimes psychological safety is because either they don't feel comfortable or they don't really know what's expected of them. They don't really want to make a fool of themselves, so they refrain from speaking up. And in those situations, you can either talk to them in advance and actually address that need in advance and tell them, hey, when I call on you, is it okay that I say this? Or is it okay that I highlight the discussion we had and I'll turn it over to you? So, make sure that you are using some of these tactics in order to foster the psychological safety. Definitely use inclusive language. We're actually in a situation now where we're being super diligent around identifying everybody's pronouns and understanding what each person's preference is in terms of pronunciation for their names. Like, these are all things that are really important and is particularly kind of respectful, and in my opinion. So when you are building that psychological safety. My daughter was saying that in her Zoom class, that's one of the things that they did from the get-go. And it made her feel so seen and so welcome by the teacher that she normally doesn't talk in Zoom, and she actually felt super comfortable in speaking up after that. So don't underestimate the power of inclusive language. Taking turns, actually designating turns, and you can even make it into a game. I put this visual on there, but in truth, you can actually make it a turn and say, anybody who's kind of number is 5, it's your turn to speak, and make it a kind of a fun thing. If you are a leader, and we all do this, I know that I sometimes need to be much more aware of this, but make sure you're not creating any undue favoritism or calling on people just because you know that they have an answer. That's something that as a leader, you want to make sure that you're really aware of. And if you're a member and you're seeing this happen, be respectful, but feel free to actually, speak up and be like, hey, I know I haven't been speaking up a lot. I love to share my experience and understand that. And even if you don't feel comfortable verbally, maybe share it in a written format. So I would make sure you do that. Any other thoughts or examples in terms of psychological safety? Feel free to share on chat if you've had situations where people are dominating the conversation. I used to do be part of a lot of focus groups and watch them from behind the screen, behind the glass. So this is another area where I see this a lot, where there might be 2 or 3 people really dominating the conversation. And what I see being super useful is for the moderator to actually say, hey, hold on, really want to actually hear from some other people. So if you are in a leadership position, there is nothing wrong with that. You can just tell somebody like, hey, hold off, I'm just really curious about this person's perspective. Feel free to do that. And one thing that could be super helpful for you is to actually think through where your different members might fall. So I talked about personality tests. This is a really super simple one, particularly if you don't have time to do a lengthy questionnaire. You can just throw some descriptors on there and have people select from each one of the columns and identify their top 2. So you can actually, in a really short order, identify whether somebody is more task or people oriented, whether they're more biased towards action or stability. And in noticing these 4 different elements, you can actually start to figure out whether there's some way or different considerations that you might want to have for these things. Yeah, I love it. Open door policies, anonymous feedback, great. I love it. Yeah, because it really, you can see from this particular framework how somebody who is much more systematic, data-driven, calculating, maybe they're not comfortable in like speaking up off the cuff. They want to actually go back and think about it. They want to digest the information. And so anonymous forms are really great. And particularly for people who may be more good listeners and supportive, they may want to have this in a private dialogue. So some great examples. Thanks, Tamara. Adriana, find a leader who's truly open to listening. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it actually kind of leads into this next part of being a really kind of important in emotional intelligence. So some communication shortcuts. Oh, sorry, that I took this from a previous slide. So that shouldn't say mentor. If your team member is one of these styles. So look for words that could resonate with different personality and style. So if you're noticing that there are people who are super quiet, use some of these phrases in order to make them feel more comfortable. particularly if you're finding that they're more supportive or they're much more calculating, you might want to use some facts in order to engage them. So use all these different styles in order for that that psychological safety to come in. And Adriana, this is kind of what what you were raising, is this active listening. Social sensitivity is a really interesting thing. Again, like I've heard from some people that they kind of say, oh, I just don't, I'm not good at emotional intelligence, or I'm not good at being able to pick up these cues. Maybe that may be the case, and I would say that it actually does take practice, even for people who are really naturally good at it. This is an element where we all have to practice. And what active listening kind of sounds like is not only being able to hear what the other person is saying, but being aware of how they're feeling. And that takes a lot of practice, to be mindful of nonverbal cues, of things that are not being said. So if you're picking up patterns of, this person always comes in and talks about their weekend, but one day they don't. That's a part of social sensitivity. So some things that might work really, really well. And this is one where I'm sure all of you have so many examples. So again, I only kind of highlighted four aspects, but feel free to type out in chat on some of the other things that work well. Particularly in the Zoom world, virtual coffees, I've noticed work extremely well. I've done this for my students where they're feeling really uncomfortable. One of the assignments I make them do is actually do a virtual coffee. You can create that in your own team. Slack actually has a plugin called Donut, where you can kind of make that super random. Special projects, special interest groups. So if you know that everybody's really interested in food, we constantly have conversations about food. We actually have like a separate conversation all the time around great places to go. Like I said, a great icebreaker is personality test. So DISC, yes, that was a really well-known one. This one's just called DISC, DISC. You can type that in and get lots of different templates for it. That one's a super easy one, I find. And then fourth aspect is honestly just to share the second piece that I talked to you guys about, like your constraints and kind of some of the things that are happening in your own world. Have that room, have a meeting just to talk about what everybody's struggles are. It really does promote that safety, that ability, and have an agreement before you actually launch into it that it stays in the room. It's something that sometimes we overlook, but it's really important to create that safety. It's really important to allow people to realize that they're being heard. Any questions? I'm going to just pause here for some.
Judy, I have a quick question on the topic of the psychological safety when it comes to toxicity. Mm-hmm. And I think that in the beginning, you talked about a foundation of alignment with goals. I think that's a super important start. Yep. So that everyone is committed and in falling in line with the direction, leadership, and goals. Yeah. But what are some advice or practices that we can use to when it starts, when you notice it starting, or side conversations, or even when let's say virtual coffees become venting sessions and things like that. I've been involved in a lot of work environments or places where there hasn't been much leadership to give me a guideline or something, a direction to avoid that kind of energy.
Yeah, it's a great point. One of the things I realized when we are actually venting, and this is why it is really important to nip it in the bud. When one person, and so it's a great thing to bring up in social sensitivity. Negativity is one of those things that spreads. So if you have one person who's really unhappy, after it, and I don't know if anybody knew this fact, after about 30 minutes of complaining, it actually starts to kill off your brain cells. So before you vent, I actually give myself a 20-minute limit now. Because when I realized, I was like, oh, it's actually not benefiting me. I always thought that it was a way to unload and to, process through my day. And to a certain extent, that's true. But when it gets over to a certain limit, it's not true. So if you are noticing it on your team, I would say that you don't want to allow that to go any further. I would look at having private conversations one-on-one. You go back to the basics. Oftentimes, negativity and dissatisfaction happens when there's something out of alignment. So whether they believe that what they're contributing, they're not getting recognized for, or what their personal goals aren't being met. So it really goes back to what their personal needs are, where they need to be at, and being really open and truthful about it. So I've had really difficult conversations of somebody who felt like they should have been promoted, somebody who felt like they were way further ahead than what they actually were. And you do need to go back and have some factual conversation. So relying on subjectivity is never the way to go. And I would say that you want to make sure that, number one, you offer them that space to be heard, right? So for the first meeting, I actually don't try to defend myself. I just let them talk about things. And I leave them with some questions where we're both going to walk away with reflection, and then we'll come back and actually say, okay, so where are the thoughts in terms of where you're dissatisfied? Where do you want to be? How can I help? And those are the things that we walk through. So actually going back to step 2, if you want to think of it that way. So really aligning, that's where I find 90% of this dissatisfaction comes in. The rare 10 is probably around like something way bigger. It's usually something that can't be addressed with just you and the other person, and it's something way bigger than what you can solve. In that instance, I would say you want to be honest. Again, like my stance, and somebody actually said it too, my stance is that I'm there to serve, right? So if I'm there as a leader to serve them, to be the best person that they can be, and to be the best version of leader that they can be, if it no longer is the case and they can't get that from the environment, then I'm the first person to tell them, I think you should leave. And I will support you in doing that. And I will help you in finding another job. So I've had that 10% where I've done that. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay. And so, yeah, I wanted to kind of close off with the team building practice. If you haven't seen this video, I want to kind of share this with you. I don't know if it'll work. Let's see. Oh no, I took the video out. Anyways, you can view it on your own time, but it's various people from Google actually talking about the project, how it came about, what they did. So if you were interested in how this actually came about, it was really super cool when I found it. I thought it made a lot of sense. And just so you know, a lot of these factors actually have a lot of academic research as well, supporting it as a key thing. So I was really comforted in seeing that it wasn't just kind of one example. It actually came about from several different sources. I wanted to also touch upon remote team building, because I know that a lot of us are still, even with the restrictions lifting, we're just slowly getting back into in person. There's still a lot of people who are remote or choose to be remote. I think now that we understand that it is possible to get things done with remote and hybrid teams, we want to make sure that we're taking that extra care to establish some inclusivity. So again, all the basics apply. We just have to be much more intentional and purposeful around uncovering motivations and goals, particularly if you're not seeing somebody in person all the time. Again, in my role previously, I had a lot of junior guys who were working from home, and this oftentimes was their first job. So imagine you have freedom because nobody is hassling you on being anywhere. Oftentimes like we weren't tracking what they were doing, so it was really important to for us to uncover their motivation and to make sure that we had a pulse on what they were doing. So I don't want anybody to mistake trust with not having knowledge of where the teams are. Those are two really different things, and they're not, just because you don't do one doesn't mean that you're good at the other. This is something I learned really super painfully. You want to make sure that you're building trust, but you still understand what they're doing. You still have a sense of, at the end of the day, what they've accomplished, whether they're actually still aligned to where you want them to go. So really take that time to check in. So I love that phrase, is checking in as opposed to check on. I love Slack for that reason. You can just quickly Slack somebody and be like, hey, is everything okay? Do you have any questions? Build the trust by mixing up different groups in formal and informal activities. Even if you have a really small group, that's why that virtual coffees, rotating people and mixing them up is really, really good idea. Building a buddy, a support system between live and virtual members. So I actually had a team where we had 3 people that weren't in the same location and the rest of us were. It was really hard actually to make sure that we weren't creating these weird groups of like the 3 people were all talking to each other and the 5 were all talking to each other. And we did notice that that was happening in the beginning because it was inevitable, right? The 3 people who were in one location could see each other every day, whereas the 5 didn't. And this was pre-pandemic, where we didn't have all of these super awesome tools that we have now. I think now that we have these things, I would have used a lot more buddy support system. I would have used a lot more kind of Slack-esque type tools where you can quickly message each other in a really informal way. I would encourage conversational turn taking, and in fact, mixing it up as opposed to, this location goes first, this location goes second, or even remote and live people. I would just mix it up and consciously really build the cohesiveness, really enforce people who are remote versus live or in a different location to be with each other. It is very difficult, I won't lie. Many examples that I've had, you almost have to go above and beyond to treat the people who aren't present as number one. You have to build that base in the beginning in order for things to feel somewhat equal. And I would just encourage everybody, do lots and lots of team building, lots of getting to know each other, lots of common ground work in order for you to be able to build that. Thanks, Christelle.
There's a question from the audience. My problem is I ask how they are doing and they feel very comfortable sharing their problems, but they miss deadlines, and I don't really want to be the main person who is being insensitive. Any advice on how I can still checking, but the work still gets done?
Yeah, it goes back. So I'm so glad you raised that. I don't know who raised that. So remember what I said about the part 2, right? You actually want to address these things head on. So talk about consequences. Talk about it even before they happen. And you want to talk about, how do you want me to approach you when you miss deadlines? So I know it feels super awkward and people think I'm crazy for talking about this before it's happened. And it's because I've seen it happen so often. And it's awkward when you have to go to them after the fact. So there's two things that I would suggest. One is dealing with it in advance and talking about that. If you can't now, what I would say is actually get to them before the deadline is there and reinforce with them some of the consequences of it not happening, and actually talk about like, where are you? And can I look at what you've done, even if it's not finished, even if it's nowhere close to finished. You just want to see where they're at. And, you know, I honestly believe in the rule of checking in even before anything's done. So build in some interim checkpoints. So if you've seen their work and previously to this, they've been missing deadlines consistently. Number one, change the mindset that you're being a mean person. You're not. There is a goal that you're all trying to reach. If their goal aligns with your goals, they should feel equally as bad. And it's not about making people feel bad, to be honest. And so I want that to be out of your mindset, but I want it to become a conversation of how can we make sure that we hit our deadlines, right? How can we together make sure that we're hitting our deadline? So if you're, as an individual, struggling, either you don't have the right knowledge, you don't have the right skills, or you don't have the right amount of time. So let's talk about what those elements are, and let's talk about what needs to give, or you need extra support to get that accomplished. Yeah, talking about it in advance. What are some reproductions outside of firing? Yeah. Yeah, I would really tap into their motivation. Oftentimes people slack off because they're not clear on what needs to be done, right? So slacking off, it's funny, like slacking off is a subjective term. It's what we interpret them to be doing. And if you ask them what they were doing, they might be like, but I'm waiting for instruction, or I don't really know what to do, or I don't want to do something and have it be wrong. Like there's like a ton of different reasons why they're quote unquote slacking off. And one could legitimately be that they're slacking off because nobody's checking, right? So you're right, like it could be that. But I would actually check in and be like, so how are you feeling about the work? You know, I wouldn't ask questions like, are you clear? Avoid questions like that because they're going to say yes. And then their yes is actually not the same as your yes. So I would go and be very specific around, hey, can you share with me what you've uncovered in this aspect? Get very specific around the types of things that they're supposed to be looking at. And if they come back and say, well, I actually haven't looked at that, then either if it's a teammate, then I would offer them some examples of where they can go and look for ways to accomplish that. If they're a direct report and they're reporting up to you, I would say, hey, let's work on this together. So there are different ways of kind of approaching it depending on whether they're a peer or they're a direct report. Hopefully that's helpful. What are some examples of consequences? Great question. Maybe if you can give me some examples of what you're working on as well, that would help. So I'll give you a work example and I'll give you an example of whether you're in a group project or something like that. So in a work environment, a consequence could be that they were supposed to maybe set up a website, let's say. That's a pretty common one, or develop a social media post. Let's say they actually don't do the number that they do. So you want to talk about whether there's a consequence that comes out of that. So if you don't do the number of things that you said that you would do, or do it by the time that you say you would do, then you want to explain the consequence of that not happening. So either you're going to lose sales and therefore that you're not going to be able to actually potentially hire this person. So you have to explain that. You have to explain some of the consequences of things not happening. I had one of the founders who found out that as they were doing the product, the quality wasn't very good. So they had to share the consequence of that happening of, yeah, you know what, our clients are actually going to return that product. I'm going to have to reduce my revenue this quarter. And that means that I might have to let somebody go if this continues, right? Okay, freelancers. Oh yeah, that's a tough one. So because they're transactional, you want to make sure that you understand some short-term motivations that they have. So it's tougher when they're freelancers and if you're not working with them all the time. If you do work with them all the time, then I would develop that rapport with them. So everything we've talked about here still goes. You still want to understand like how they like to work, what things are important to them, what are their individual goals. Maybe they're trying to develop a portfolio. So you want to really tap into what their motivations are in order for you to actually develop this trust in this team. And because you don't have consistent teams all the time, you're actually working really hard to build that relationship all the time. So what I would say is like almost have a template for when you go into a project or a shoot, that everybody's role is extremely clear so that you're not wasting time developing that. And then I would have some quick icebreakers so that everybody feels super comfortable if they do have some constraints. If something that they're really not comfortable in sharing, but they're hiding, comes out in the beginning really quickly. Because otherwise things are going to get missed. And guess what? They don't care because they're a freelancer, right? So if they miss your deadline, the worst thing that can happen is you don't hire them back and they don't really worry about that. So you want to make sure that you're tapping into something that they do care about, whether it's a Google review, whether it's a reference on a portfolio, so tap into something that they would care about. Yeah, great point, Azara. Yes, nice to see you too. Okay, some great questions. So that was the content for today. I wanted to really just conclude by reinforcing that, team building isn't just like kind of a one-time thing. It's funny because I always feel like we always talk about team building like it's an event or it's an activity. It's actually a practice that you do day in and day out. It's a conscious awareness of the people on your team, how you actually relate to them, how you depend on them, the conversations that you have, the feeling and the trust that you have with each other.